it's interesting. The question keeps on coming up again and again, especially as a teacher of young children in the Jewish day school. Why is it that the Jewish people are so hated? And why is it that what's happening now, if it was any other people doing this, not only would there not be negative talk against them, but the world would support it. The world, we're the only people that needs to defend our right to defend ourselves. And the simple answer is, if you look at all the people that have hated the Jewish people throughout history, starting from, throughout history, from Hitler to Stalin to Hamas, and the list is endless, you'll notice one thing in common. All those people were evil and darkness. And evil and darkness hates light. It's just a fact that light is a threat to darkness. And if you think about that, it's a very empowering thought. It's a very empowering thought that we don't even see specifically our own greatness, but evil is threatened by us because they see our tremendous potential. They see our tremendous light. To the Jewish people are a light unto all nations, and it brings up their conscience. And so the way to fight that is to say, no, they are not light, and to say that the Jews are darkness, and to say that the Jews are causing a genocide and the Jews are doing all the evil things. Again, it's just because darkness cannot face light. So this is its way of dealing with it. But the way that we need to deal with it is to just bring in more and more and more light, because we know that light is the only thing that could dispel this darkness. Okay, I'd like to start. I'm veering off the topic a little because I'm going to let Rabbi Greenberg continue. I was told that this series is on the role of how to live as a Jew, and going through the Torah and mitzvot and how to perform mitzvot. But I'm going to veer off. We're going to speak about the role of a woman's role in Judaism, and also some of the main mitzvot that belong to a woman. So before we start, and women and men, it's a fact, are different. The masculine and feminine energies are different. I want to start with where our DNA as a Jewish woman began from. The difference between the creation of Adam and Eve. There's 4 levels of creation. The lowest level is called in Hebrew domain, which is inanimate objects, earthly objects. A stone would be an example of the lowest level of God's creation. Then there's tzomeach, that's growth, like a plant. A plant is a higher level of God's creation than a rock, because it has life. And then you have animals, and then you have the human being, which is differentiated from animals as midaber, a person who speaks. So when God created Adam, he created Adam from the dust. He formed Adam, think of almost like a clay shape, with dust and water, and then he breathed a soul into his nostrils. Then how did God create the first woman? The first woman was created from Adam. She was created from Adam's rib, and then once she was created, God blew a soul into her nostrils. So if you think about it, the Jewish women are created from a higher source. Adam was created from the dust of the earth, and the Jewish woman was created from Adam, from a human being, a person who speaks. Therefore, the gap between physicality and spirituality is a much smaller gap in a woman than in a man, because, again, her physical body was made from a human being. She was created from the rib of Adam, whereas Adam was created from the dust. So because the woman has a smaller gap between her physical and her spirituality, she has a potential to be more spiritual and to have a greater intuition than man. But this is generally speaking because every man has masculine and feminine characteristics, and every woman has masculine and feminine characteristics as well. If we want to know what is the role of the Jewish woman, the first thing to look at is the Torah, because the Torah is the source of all of creation, and in the Torah it's best to look at the matriarchs as our role models. Yes?
If the woman got her body, man got her gut, she had a soul.
And God gave her soul same way. And so men generally are more, and again, we're generalizing now, but with every person has a specific role in this world. So within the general, every person has their purpose and mission in life. But on a general level, men were definitely more, had roles in conquering the darkness. They definitely had more leadership and public roles, whereas a woman's role was preserving the light and nurturing the light. Looking at our matriarchs would be Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, and each of them teach us so much, starting from sadly, society puts women in second-class citizens. But if you look at the Torah, even at our first woman, Sarah, when Abraham has a dilemma, God tells Abraham, listen to her voice. Do as she says. So we see the strength that the Torah views a woman. In this specific week's Torah portion that we're heading into now, we see that Jacob marries the two sisters, Rachel and Leah. And when we look at Leah, the strength of her character, that she waited 7 years. I mean, she wanted to marry her loved one, Jacob, and her father made Jacob work to earn her. And after so many years, when she's finally ready to go to her chuppah, she is told by her father, no, you are the younger daughter, and in our home, we don't skip. The older daughter gets married before the younger one. Therefore, Leah is going to be getting married to Jacob and not you. And first of all, she has tremendous self-restraint and she's quiet, which is an unbelievable strength. We know it's much easier to yell and scream than it is to have that self-control. Not only that, but she goes as far as giving her sister, Leah, the secret code that Jacob had arranged with her, that under the chuppah he would ask her for a code to make sure that she was the correct woman that he was marrying under the veil that she was covered with at the chuppah. There are some commentaries that say that Leah and Rachel were twins, and that they looked very similar, other than Leah had red eyes from crying and being very emotional. The reason she cried a lot was because the talk was that, oh, there's two sets of twins that are first cousins. Rebecca and Laban both had twins. Rebecca had Esau and Jacob, and Laban had Leah and Rachel. So the older twin, Leah, is going to marry Esau, and Rachel is going to marry Jacob, and that bothered Leah tremendously, and she cried a lot about that. And then according to that commentary of them being twins and Leah being the older one, when in last week's Torah portion that we read, when Jacob got the firstborn blessings through trickery, which again, that's a class of its own, and this is not a Torah portion class, but that's what he was supposed to do. But God is so strict with righteous people that even something that's not wrong, there will be a measure for measure. Therefore, because he got the firstborn blessings through trickery, his marriage ended up being through trickery as well. And instead of just right away marrying Leah first, and then Rachel, it had to come about through trickery. But if Leah was supposed to marry the firstborn by Jacob acquiring the firstborn privileges, Leah was then supposed to marry Jacob. We see how giving Rachel is. I mean, what is greater to a person than marrying their soulmate? And she was ready to give that up to her sister, and not only give it up to her sister, but tell her sister the secret code, so that if Jacob asks Leah the secret code at the chuppah, she would know what to answer, and she would be spared from embarrassment. This is just an example from this week's Torah portion of our matriarch role models that is part of the woman's DNA. How can we use these qualities of the Jewish woman in our day-to-day lives? I remember when I was a kid, and my father would tell me to do something. He would tell me, let's say, to clean up the toys or wash the dishes. And sometimes I did a sloppy job because I was in a rush and just wanted to get it done with. And he spoke to me in Yiddish, and he would say, did you do it yoitze sein oder mit an emes? Which means, did you do it yoitze sein means like just to fulfill your basic obligation, or did you do it with sincerity and your whole heart? Did you do it yoitze sein or mit an emes? And this, to me, captures the woman's role in an everyday life. That as a Jewish woman, our role is to whatever, it's not even what is the Jewish woman supposed to do as a Jewish woman, but more how is she supposed to do whatever she does. That whatever she does with sincerity and with her whole heart, and is present in the moment, and that's all that exists, and really passionate and loving way, because the woman is by nature more emotional and more intuitive and more giving. So if we can do everything with that sincerity, then that the structure of the day-to-day life of a Jewish woman. Unfortunately, society's view of the Jewish woman doesn't specifically match to the Torah's. I have to say that the feminist movement, which, like everything, has two sides to the coin, has some positive and negative aspects. But on the positive side, the feminist movement has brought about a lot of positive changes, from equal pay to more opportunities and so forth. I like to think of the feminist movement as trying to help society catch up to the Hasidic view of what a woman is. If you were to ask a woman from the past generations if they thought that women were second-class citizens, they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. They wouldn't know what you're talking about, because there was a certain simplicity and a purity, and that women of the past generations had, that made their vision be with clarity. And they didn't compare themselves to males. Their vision of themselves was grounded in the female herself. When she viewed herself as a person that God created. It was her direct connection to God. It wasn't she defined herself based on God created her for a purpose and a mission, and she was going to try to do that. Her definition of herself was not based on how society viewed her. So I don't think that they would even understand where you were coming with that question. And if you asked today, women in the community that I was raised in Crown Heights, they would very strongly say, if you ask them if they view themselves as second-class citizens, a very strong no. The woman that I saw in my life from, sisters, my mother, my grandmother, teachers, and all the women in my community were forces to reckon with. They were the power force in the house. Even as a kid, if I wanted to get away with something, I asked my father, not my mother. That's just the way the way it was. That's when a mother said no, it was a no, and it wasn't argued with. So the woman is a very strong force in Judaism. Now, women are also always, let me just try to follow here on, Judaism glorifies the private role. If you ask any teenager today or college students who is their role models, they're going to tell you movie stars and athletes and politicians and corporate executives, because society values the public life. But in Judaism, the important role was more anything private. Like in this room, the holiest object in this room is our Torah, and the Torah is kept in a closed ark. Anything that was more important, anything that was holy, was something that was not flaunted. It was more private. So the Jewish woman definitely in Judaism has a more private role. You'll see the public roles in a synagogue are usually run by the men, whereas the woman is the mainstay of the home. Interestingly, during COVID, it was very obvious. I think it was an eye-opener to all of us. Where's the continuation of Judaism? And the survival of Judaism and the future of the Jewish people is certainly the Jewish home. I don't want to quote something that I don't have accurate as far as polls, but the two most celebrated mitzvot is a Passover Seder, which is not done in a synagogue, it's done in a home, and the lighting of the Hanukkah menorah, which is done in a home. And if you think of that, those even in the most secular communities, people that are not holding on to anything, those two are the most popular observances that people still observe, and that came from the home. So the future of the Jewish people is the home, and it's the Jewish woman that's entrusted with that. In fact, according to Torah, a person's identity as a Jew is based on the Jewish woman. If a person's mother is Jewish, that makes them fully Jewish. There's no mathematical fractions when it comes to identity. If a person's mother is Jewish, they're Jewish. If it's just their father that's Jewish, they're not Jewish. They couldn't be inspired and feel a Jewish spark, which might lead them to doing a proper conversion. But a person's Jewish identity is defined by the woman. Yes?
Then why is it the children follow the father's traditions, not the mother's traditions? So the next generation follows what the father did. Right,
and also the Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael would go according to the father as well. A father's role is extremely significant. I mean, we see that very, very clearly. And anybody who came from a single-parent home will tell you that there's no question that there's a gap. I mean, we're not saying that the man's role is not significant. He has a very significant role. But again, the actual neshama, the father has an obligation of educating his children. He could pass on that obligation and pay tuition and send his kids to school, but it was the father's responsibility. But the mother was the one who taught by way of example. by way of example. Now, I just printed a letter of the Rebbe that I'm just going to it's long, I'm only going to read parts of it, but this woman writes to the Rebbe questions. First she asks certain questions about wanting to understand the meaning behind mitzvot. Mitzvot is God's commandments. And then she asks specifically about what is her role since she does not have children. And as an Orthodox woman, she kind of feels very marginalized. She feels that she doesn't really have a role because there's such a strong emphasis on a woman being a mother and the motherly role of a woman. So I'm just going to read some parts of the Rebbe's response to her. Needless to say, you don't need to apologize for asking questions. On the contrary, since Jews are described in the Torah as a wise and understanding people, it is desirable that questions which come within the realm of human understanding should also be understood and not be left to faith alone. Whenever this is possible. There's only one prerequisite to asking questions. This prerequisite goes back to the time when the Torah and mitzvot were given at Sinai, namely that the Torah must be accepted on the basis of we will do it first. And then you can ask your questions and we will understand, meaning that the performance of mitzvot must not be made conditional only if we understand the reason behind it. So the Rebbe is saying that we have to do a mitzvah whether we understand it or not, but the Rebbe says that Judaism very strongly encourages questions because we are a people that are a wise and understanding people, and if you understand the meaning and the reason behind the mitzvah, it's definitely going to add a lot of vitality and enthusiasm to the performance of that mitzvah. But it shouldn't be conditional, even if you don't understand the reason behind the mitzvah. One has to do what the Jews said at Sinai. We will do it, and then we will listen. Meaning, like if I tell my child, you're going to sleep early today, why? It shouldn't be that only if his mind understands the reason why his mother wants him to go to sleep early, does he have to go to sleep early. Do as I said. And then once you're in bed, call me to your room, and I'll tell you while you're tucked in bed the reason why you have to go to sleep early tonight. Meaning that there has to be that concept of authority, of acceptance, and then only afterwards to ask for the explanation. This basic principle and attitude is also a matter of common sense. If the Torah is accepted as divine, otherwise there's no point in any questions or discussions, since if it's man-made, one is free to do as one pleases. Since the Torah is given by a supreme being whose essence is beyond human grasp, it would be a contradiction in terms to demand to know the meaning and significance of each divine mitzvah before performing it, for it would reduce the supreme being to the level of a limited human intelligence, which moreover is subject to development since the human understanding increases from day to day with newly acquired knowledge and experience. Yet he insists on understanding it today on his present level. So the Rebbe is saying that even when asking questions, which we should, we have to understand that we'll never understand the full scope behind a divine commandment. Because to expect to understand the full scope means that we are reducing Hashem to human intelligence. How could a human being understand? It's like a bug crawling on the ground understanding physics. It's just not meant to understand physics. And the gap between the human being and God is much, much greater than a bug and a human being. Okay, then the Rebbe says, now with regard to your question about the woman's role of our religion, or as you refer to it, Orthodox Judaism, I must first point out that the division of Judaism into Orthodox conservative reform is purely an artificial one, for all Jews have one and the same Torah, given by the one and same God, though there are more observant Jews and less observant Jews. But to tag on a label does not, of course, change the reality. As for the attitude of Judaism to women, it has also been frequently pointed out that those who think that the Torah places the woman in an inferior role to that of a man is under misconception. There's no basis in truth. Man and woman are like the head and the heart in the physical body. Both are equally vital, though each has entirely different functions, and only the normal functioning of both together ensure a healthy body. The same is true of the role of a man and woman in Jewish life, and indeed in any healthy human society. So the Rebbe is comparing the role of a man to that of the mind, and the role of a woman to that of the heart. And both depend on each other. The mind, the brain is dead if blood isn't pumping to the brain. And the heart needs the brain to direct it to pump. So they're both very much interdependent. And it would be ridiculous for a body to say they didn't want a heart and they wanted two minds, or for the body to say they wanted two hearts and not a mind. Yes?
Yeah, when I look at yourself, your mother-in-law, that you're all extremely hardworking and devoted, and you don't waste time, and you're non-self-indulgent. Yet this society's prototype of the Jewish woman is Jap, Jewish American princess, meaning I want everything, I'm entitled to everything. It's not only different than what it is, but it's 180 degrees different. It's completely flipped around.
Right, but I would say that that's not only specifically what you say, Jap, as far as about the woman. I think that generally in society today, and that's a conversation for itself, we're definitely raising handicapped princesses and handicapped princes. There's a concept of entitlement versus obligation. You know, just look at New York. We have the Statue of Liberty, and that liberty is our right. Happiness, it says that in the Declaration, right? Happiness is our pursuit of happiness is our right, whereas Judaism doesn't say that happiness is our right. Judaism says that happiness is our obligation. When I have strep, I won't come to school because I know it's contagious. Well, you know what? Our moods and attitudes are even more contagious than a virus bug. So Judaism says that happiness is our obligation. It doesn't finding joy and finding and liberty. These are obligations that we have to ourselves in order to fulfill our purpose in this world and to those around us. Whereas society tells us that it's our entitlement. So again, that's the shift it's a big shift. It's a paradigm shift that we have to do to view life through the Torah prism. Then the Rebbe says, if one is unable to perform a certain mitzvah, like not having children or being single and not having the opportunity to get married, the merciful one excuses a person who is incapable of performing this mitzvah of being a mother. Indeed, God, who knows what is in the hearts of everyone, and knowing that were the person able, he or she would have performed this mitzvah, considers the thought in place of the deed. That, you know, like the Rebbe had said to somebody a soldier in the army, actually a Lubavitcher, a Chabad boy who came as a lone soldier from Crown Heights and went to the army and this was years ago, lost his arm in battle in Gaza, and he said, how could that be? I had just taken upon myself not long before this battle that I was going to put on tefillin every day, and I cannot put on the tefillin on my arm now, because the arm that I'm meant to put on tefillin on, we always put the tefillin on the weaker arm. So if one is a righty, they put the tefillin on the left arm. If one is a lefty, they put the tefillin on the right arm. The arm that he lost was the arm that he would put on tefillin on. What does this mean? And the Rebbe said, Hashem considers you putting on tefillin every single day. You have done your obligation already. So the same with if there's so much, this woman is saying that there's so much talk and emphasis, and rightfully so, I can understand this woman's hurt, that there's so much centered around the woman's role in the home and the woman's role as a mother, that there's nothing greater than it. In fact, there are certain mitzvot, when you continue in this course, and Rabbi is going to teach the different mitzvot, there are certain mitzvot that women are exempt from. And the reason that they're exempt from these mitzvot are because they're very, they have to be done at a very specific time. And I find that very empowering, that Hashem understands that as a mother, I cannot adhere to a very rigid schedule. There's no way that I could be in shul at a certain time for morning service and the evening service. That just wouldn't, it would definitely cause stress in the home to be able to balance the two. And Hashem does not want there to be a conflict between the two, showing that the primary responsibility of a woman is caring for her children over those responsibilities that have time restrictions. Now, some of those commandments that women are exempt from, they themselves have taken upon themselves. You know, it's not mandatory, but they've taken it upon themselves. Like, for example, the hearing of the shofar, and some other mitzvot. But generally, mitzvot that have to be done at a certain time or a certain place, women are exempt from. Interestingly, that when you walk into a shul, at least I don't like to use the word orthodox when the Rebbe clearly says that these are very artificial labels, but it very much seems, I mean, their show is definitely run by a man. Interestingly, most of the laws of how one should pray is actually derived from a woman. There was a woman by the name of Hannah, and Hannah was the mother. She lived about 3,000 years ago, and she was the mother of Samuel the prophet. And again, I'm not going to go into that story now, but she goes, this was even before the first temple was built. She went to the tabernacle in Shiloh, and she prayed to have a child because she was childless for many years. And the high priest thought that she was drunk the way she prayed, because he had never seen a woman pray. She was praying in a low whisper that it was only audible to her ears but not to others, and she was crying and she was very passionate, and it was Hannah that had to tell the high priest that no, she is praying to God for a child. And it's a continuous story, but from that, from the way she prayed, a lot of laws are derived. For example, to the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah is a specific prayer that is said quietly, but one has to say it loud enough that they can hear their words. And also the concept of crying in prayer, and many other laws are derived from the way she prayed. So women, again, have that naturally. If you think about it, the concept of that one is supposed to be very vulnerable when they pray. They're stripping themselves in front of God, and they're very vulnerable, and they're emotional, and they're crying. These are characteristics that's a lot easier for most women than for men. And again, I'm generalizing. You have men that could be more emotional and some women that are not. But for a man to accept that he's so dependent on his everyday life, and to be passionate and emotional and vulnerable is a bigger leap than for a woman. And it could also be for that reason alone that the men were given more roles in the synagogue to help them make that leap. I'm glad that I don't have the responsibility to pray 3 times a day. I mean, my prayer on a day-to-day basis is a very abridged prayer, very, very short, and I try to make that short couple of minutes of prayer be full of meaning and passion. That's, because with running a household, there isn't, diapering my baby is my way of serving God. I'm taking care of his children. Every child is a child of God. What greater responsibility could a woman have than taking care of God's children itself? There is an analogy given by a rabbi who said, when somebody said that they can't really pray properly on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, because their children keep on disturbing them with their needs. And, the children are not fasting, and they have to go prepare food for the children and entertain them and take care of them and take them out of the shul, out of the synagogue when the kids are making noise. And the analogy that this rabbi had given was that there was a king that had a very, very important meeting regarding the running of his country, and he had all his important people coming. And the king had 2 young children, and he hired his trusted babysitter to take care of the kids during this important meeting. Well, the babysitter heard that there's going to be an important meeting, and she really, really wanted to be part of that important meeting. So she neglects the kids. She leaves them in a room in the palace by themselves, and she attends the meeting because she feels that if this is a very important meeting, and I feel very connected to the king, I want to be there. And the king is very upset. The king says, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "I heard that this was the most important meeting of the year." And he said, "But to me, my children are even more important than my country. So to me, I gave you the role to take care of my children. That is way more significant than coming to this meeting." And the rabbi was trying to point out with this analogy that children are not an obstacle for parents in serving God, that they take so much of our time, but actually that children are the way to serve God. That not only is it not an obstacle, but that is a direct pathway for us to connect to God. And for people that do not have children, based on the Rebbe's letter, they have fulfilled their duty just by thought of wishing that they were able to, but even more so, the Rebbe says that they should use their motherly instinct, which every mother has, that nurturing and giving ability, whether it's being a teacher, a therapist, working in an organization, nurturing those that are in need. And that is how they would fulfill their role as a woman. Okay, so everyone has both the feminine and the masculine characteristics, and we know that right now it could also be that this whole feminine movement is because we're before the coming of Mashiach, and that before the coming of Mashiach, the feminine dynamic is going to be stronger than the masculine. It says that during exile, the main role is to chase away darkness. And that is the man's role, to beat the darkness and conquer the darkness. And the woman's role is more to nurture the light and preserve the light. And that is the role of the Messianic age. The woman is also compared to the moon. And I'm just going to see if I can quickly pull up a letter from the Rebbe on that. The woman is compared to the moon, and the male is compared to the sun. There's so many analogies, there's so many symbolic things. But interestingly, in the beginning of creation, it was God created the moon and the sun the same size and the same powerful. And it was the moon who told God that you can't have 2 kings share a single crown. And so God replied, "Go and make yourself smaller." And interestingly, this exchange, and the exchange is a little more than that, but this exchange conveys that God really did not want to diminish the status of the moon, and he did so reluctantly only after the moon herself raises a valid point that there cannot be two kings sharing a single crown. It seems that from God's plan that he would have preferred the sun and moon to remain equal but distinct separate luminaries, in each shining in their respective arenas, and both equally recognized for their essential contribution that they provide. But it was the moon herself, because the moon represents the feminine characteristic, which is very intuitive, and with her intuition and understanding, she recognized that in an imperfect world that cannot be. So in a messianic world, you could have two great luminaries of equal proportion that the world recognizes, but in an imperfect world that we are in, we live in a world that has only understanding for things in terms of a hierarchy. So it would take centuries for that concept of equality to come forward. And as we are progressing in time, as we're getting closer to the Messianic age, the world is slowly, not yet there, but slowly recognizing that they have very distinct roles, and that the Rebbe says there's no true basis to say that one is more important than the other. They have very distinct separate roles. And that when Mashiach comes, the world will recognize that and will be back to the sun and moon being visibly in its full power, but also the way the moon waxes and wanes is directly also with the woman's cycle and physically the way the woman was created. So there's many, many analogies given of the woman being similar to the moon. We mentioned about Hannah, that Hannah was the mother of Samuel the prophet, and you see how much time, I'm just going to go through this fast. I did not realize the time passing. The woman has some specific commandments, and Hannah, who is the mother of Samuel the prophet, her name is the acronym for the three most important mitzvot, commandments trusted to a woman. The chet in Hannah's name represents Challah, and the nun represents Nida, which means family purity, and the Hey, her name is a three-letter name. Hey represents Hadlakot, Neirot, the lighting of our Shabbat and holiday candles. So let's talk a moment about Challah. When the Jews entered the land of Israel, they were commanded that when they make dough, that they should take off a piece of dough, separate one piece of dough to give it to the high priest, before they were permitted to enjoy and eat the remainder of the dough. This separation of when one makes a challah dough, to take off a piece, that separation is actually called challah. And the challah loaves that we eat on Shabbos is affectionately called challah for this mitzvah of challah, of separating a piece for God. Now, we don't have the Holy Temple now, so we can't give that small portion to the high priest. So now it's burned to show that it's like a burnt offering for God. And this is done for challah. But challah is symbolic of all bread. And bread is a staple food. It represents sustenance. In times of war, bread was what helped, what sustained people. The fact that we set aside a portion of our dough to God before we benefit from that dough shows the Jewish woman's affirmation that everything comes from God, that our wealth is not coming from the power of our own hands. The taking of that dough before even benefiting from the dough and setting it aside for God shows that we recognize dough represents not only bread and sustenance, but all of our finances, like rolling in dough, so to speak, right? So that our finances come from Hashem. Also, as Rabbi Greenberg is going to go in depth, the mitzvah of kosher. that this mitzvah of challah given to the woman also includes the kashrut, the kosher of the house. Now, men obviously are obligated to eat kosher as well, but my husband and my children completely trust me for their kosher. I'm the one that's doing the grocery shopping. I'm the one that's doing the cooking. So they're eating kosher. They're depending on me to help them keep this fundamental mitzvah, which we know that when one eats, it becomes internalized. It becomes a part of ourselves. So the woman is Hashem, and men and children put a tremendous amount of trust in the woman by depending on her and trusting her for the kosher in their home. And then there's the family purity, which is regarded as one of the most important mitzvot. It's actually ranked in importance to circumcising a boy and fasting on Yom Kippur. And it's so important that if a Jewish community is extremely poor and cannot afford, it's a small Jewish community, they cannot afford to have a Torah and also build a mikvah, which is a ritual home for family purity, they should build a mikvah and not have a Torah in their community, because family purity is the future of the Jewish people. And this mitzvah is also entrusted in the woman because, again, I'm just going to say this just in a 2-minute summary, and hopefully that will be in depth in one of the classes, but I'm saying this as the woman's mitzvah. When a woman is menstruating, she is considered in an impure state. And I say impure, I don't say dirty, because it has nothing to do with dirtiness. Whenever there's any association with death, when you go to a funeral, when you go to a cemetery, you're rendered impure because you came in contact with death. And so one has to wash their hands, the washing of the hands, 6 pores alternating, once on the right and once on the left, to purify themselves because they were in contact with death. When a woman is menstruating, it's also considered a whisper of death to her body. There was a potential for life, and that potential was not actualized. So again, impurity in Judaism is specifically when there is contact even with the whisper of death. So during that time, she does not have physical contact. There isn't any physical intimacy with her husband. And it is only after she is done and waits a week to make sure that she is done with her menstruation that she immerses in a natural body of water called the mikvah. And when she's immersing, she's almost like a baby in its mother's womb, where the baby is in a bag of water and for 40 weeks and then emerges with life. So the mikvah's measurement, the measurement of the water in this body of water, is a Hebrew measurement called seah, and it has to be 40 seah, in the same as takes for birth a pregnancy 40 weeks, and that God, in order to cleanse this world after the flood during to cleanse this world from all the evilness during the time of Noah, God had to, so to speak, submerge the entire world into a mikvah. That's why it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. That measurement of 40 is specifically with the changing from impurity to purity. When she emerges, it's considered like a rebirth for her. And then she continues her intimate physical relationship with her husband. But so the husband also has a role in this, because he is not being intimate with his wife during the time that he is not allowed to, but she is the one he has to trust. She's the one that's going to know when her menstruation started, when it ended. Again, he's depending on her. If a male wants to keep this mitzvah, but the wife is not interested, there's nothing he can do. So she's really holding on to this mitzvah, which is the family purity of her family. And then we said, again, the acronym that there's more than these 3 mitzvot. There's the mitzvah of modesty and the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, which we don't have time to discuss that, but the last one I want to mention of the acronym of Chana's name is the lighting of Shabbat and holiday candles. So the woman was, interestingly, the father usually taught Hebrew, and that's why Hebrew language back in the day is more of a masculine language. Like if I'm addressing all of you in Hebrew, I will speak in the male form. When I teach my students, and I have girls and boys in the class, I will call them Yiladim, because if it's boys and girls, you use the male plural form. And in Yiddish, when you're speaking to males and females, the plural form you use is the feminine, because it was the mother that spoke Yiddish in the home to the kids. The kids learned Yiddish from their mother. Yiddish is even called the Mame Lashon. Lashon means a tongue, the mother tongue, because Yiddish was learned at home from the mother, and Hebrew was more like in school, or the Lashon HaKodesh from the father. But the woman is the woman in the house, and when she lights candle, she visibly ushers in the Shabbat into her home. Once the woman lights the Shabbat candles, Shabbat has begun in the home. Once she lights the holiday candles, the holiday has been ushered in the home. So she also brings that spiritual and uplifting light into the home with her lighting of candles. Yes?
What about when there's only a male in the home?
Then he should be lighting the candles.
So he basically is substituting for the woman in that case.
That's correct.
That he's doing it, and Shabbat begins after he lights the candles.
That's correct. If there isn't a female in the home, the male should light candles. So again, this mitzvah was given specifically to the woman, but not exclusively to her. In the event if a woman is in the hospital and she cannot light candles that Friday, the husband can light at home for her. Yes?
What about, is there any tradition about when there's multiple women in the home?
Everybody lights. This world is so filled with darkness. The more light that we can bring into this world, the better. A woman lights a candle every Friday at the correct time of lighting candles, and which is right before sundown. If she's a married woman, she lights 2 candles, and the tradition is also, like, I light 9 candles every Friday, one for myself, my husband, and for each of my 7 children, even though each of my 3 daughters are lighting their own candles as well. So and if there's multiple women and even girls, from when traditionally girls in the Hasidic communities start lighting Shabbat candles at the age of 3. The boys have their hair cutting and the girls usually light at 3. There are some that will, even if a kid is extremely verbal and really understands the concept of lighting Shabbat candles before age 3, being that we're in such dark times, I've seen some parents even start at 2.5 already, even before the 3rd birthday. But the more light that we can bring in, light is very powerful. Light, it's a lot easier to dispel darkness. It's so much easier to bring in light than take a whip and whip the darkness. It's just, and we're living in a time of I mean, right now, especially with the war and everything going on in the world, that there shouldn't be one representative. Everybody should light. And hopefully the men in the home, I mean, very, very soon this month is when we're going to usher in the most light into our homes. Hanukkah cannot come soon enough. It's interesting that Hanukkah is always in the time when the nights are the longest and the darkest. This is the days are so short now and the nights are so long, and that's not only physically but also figuratively and symbolically of dark times and coldness. The winter is cold, and for some people that's more depressing. And we light our menorah now, especially Shabbat and Hanukkah when they come out together, and you have the Shabbat candles and the Hanukkah candles, and together both the role of men and women in partnership are going to usher in the Messianic age.
Thank you.
Close it. Okay, you have, I guess, a few minute break, and then Rabbi Yehoshua will give the next class.